So the big news is that Elon actually had a huge event. By the way, kudos to the SpaceX and XAI team for putting Elon in the middle of the scene and building a beautiful stage here. They're really making progress. This stuff is like serious. But Elon announced something that is not just world changing, but planetary system changing. This is a huge announcement, too big to cover everything here in this part, but we are going to look at what I think is the most important piece in this whole presentation, because it gives us an insight not just into the first principle vision that we can go through in a second, but into very specific pieces of the puzzle that are much more relevant for what happens next and now. So let's listen in what Elon has to say. I'm jumping into the middle of the presentation because I want to show you something very specific.
Starship. And Starship is a critical piece of the puzzle, because in order to scale compute and scale power, you have to go to space, which means that you need massive payload to space. And Starship will enable that. So this gives you sort of just a sense of scale. We've got Optimus there, Optimus for scale. And Optimus is about 5'11", so it gives you a sense of the size of the Starship V3 rocket. Starship V4 will be much longer, actually. The Starship V4 will make Starship V3 look kind of short. So we'll expand with Starship V3 to 200 tons of payload to orbit from 100 tons with V3. And then you can see that that's just a rough approximation of the AI, the mini version of the AI sat. So that's roughly 100 kilowatts. It's showing the solar panels and the radiator to scale. So for some reason, there's been a bizarre debate about radiators in space. It's safe to say SpaceX knows how to do heat rejection in space with 10,000 satellites in orbit. Might know a thing or two. So you can see the radiator is actually quite small relative to the solar panels. And we call that the mini-sat, since that's just 100 kilowatts. We expect future satellites to probably go to the megawatt range. Yeah. So in order to get to the terawatt of compute per year, you need about 10 million tons to orbit per year, and at 100 kilowatts per ton. So we're confident this is feasible. Like, no new physics or impossible things are required to get there. So I'm confident actually that SpaceX will get to 10 million tons to orbit per year. And then we're building up to a terawatt of solar. So that solves will solve the solar problem, the power generation. So then the key missing ingredient is therefore a terawatt of compute. So
okay, we stop it here because this is what I wanted to focus on. This video is not about covering Terrafab itself. I will comment on that. But the most important piece of the equation is not manufacturing chips. That comes downstream of something else. And that something else is Starship and the ability to transport a lot of stuff to orbit cheaply, and then the architecture of the famous AI satellite. And Elon said some extremely important things if you really listened closely to what he said. And this is very, very important, because here's my take on it. If you are an Elon fan, if you are a SpaceX and Tesla fan, and Elon presents a first principle pitch like this, we could basically create Kardashev 2 civilization. We can surround the sun with so much satellites that capture all the energy that we capture all the energy in the solar system. If you hear that and you're a geek and you're a Tesla fan, Elon fan, you say, this is the most amazing plan I've ever heard. But that's pie in the sky, like literally. I believe in it, it's amazing. But then we have the Wall Street analysts right on the other side, and us as also tactical investors. And we have to say, well, but how do we get from here to there? And that's exactly where Pioneer Alpha lives, where I am focused on. I'm focused not on the present and not on the distant future, but on the close vicinity future between the big goals that we need to understand and the current state of things. And that means we need to figure out, when is this stuff actually becoming real? When is it becoming real? Not when it is completely real, when we are Kardashev 2, that's going to take a long time. But when do we make this all-decisive leap from where we are now to the trajectory, the real cash flow trajectory into that new world? Because that question is everything that counts. If the answer to that question is in 2035, that doesn't make me very excited as an investor. But if we say that future, where we start seeing scaled AI satellites in orbit, if that future is in 2028 or 2027, everything changes, because that's not priced into anything. So we need to determine what is actually true here. What is that time scale? And Elon in this presentation revealed some amazing, I'll share another here, Sawyer Merritt focused on that chart. And that is exactly the chart we actually have to focus on here. This chart tells us a lot. For the first time ever, do we see a small depiction, a conceptual depiction of the AI satellite Mini, 100 kilowatts. That's an enormous data center, by the way, 100 kilowatts, just to be clear. That's a tenth of a gigawatt. It's enormous. So this gives away a lot of things. I modeled this out, I think in November or December last year, when this first became a thing. I did quick back of the napkin math with a lot of leeway and margin built in, which means my solar panels are bigger than Elon's here, and my radiators are bigger, but not that much bigger, actually. So I was close, and I purposeful, and by the way, I'm not an engineer. I just asked AI, a bunch of AIs, did some math to determine if this is all feasible. Mine is probably 3 to 4 times bigger for the same 100 kilowatt. Not 3, no, more like 2 to 3 times maybe bigger. And the radiators are probably 5 times bigger on my sketch. That's very good news, because I determined this is very feasible already. And I built in that margin. Not that because I'm so smart and I knew the truth. It's more because I did back up the napkin math and said, okay, what's the reasonable worst case? Now that Elon comes out with that, we see that the radiators are actually much smaller than the solar panels. I had them, I think, at half the size, but that's more like a fourth or fifth of the size. So this is very feasible. It's much more easy than I thought, because it's all about how big do these panels and the radiators have to be for a 100 kilowatt data center. We also now know that 100 kilowatts is probably a good, reasonable middle ground scale size for the satellites. And we have to be very obsessed with the question, what is that exact first prototype, first iteration of these AI satellites? Because it's the all-decisive question. Technically, there are 2 all-decisive questions here. And again, I'm asking these questions because I'm focused on the next 12 to 24 months. And the question, do we see any substantive scale in that time frame? Because the market would say no way. But I think we will. Because there are 2 inflection point trajectories here for space AI. Number 1, the satellites. Jensen, in the GTC conversations, he kind of implied that this is a little complicated, especially because of the radiators and because of the question, how do you cool very large data centers in space? That this is a kind of an unsolved problem. I had the suspicion that Jensen just doesn't know too much about it, because I looked at other stuff and saw people have solved it. But now Elon came out and made very clear, probably in indirect response to Jensen, that it's absolutely no problem for SpaceX. He basically said it's a trivial problem in the presentation. He said, we really understand how we do that. We already do it with the Starlink satellites. So as I predicted, absolutely not a problem. This is a very small scale problem for SpaceX to solve the radiator question. Quick side note, by the way, in case you don't know what I'm talking about, in space, you don't have any kind of convection. You don't have air, you have vacuum, which means cooling is actually very hard, even though you have close to zero Kelvin, centigrade Kelvin. So it's very cold, but you have vacuum, so you can't just easily cool stuff. You have to use radiation, which is like a physics formula for it, how you radiate heat out through aluminum panels or whatever. And so that is now also clearly solved. So back to my two big trajectories that are these inflection points. The first question, to make space really happen, to unlock this infinite economy, the infinite economy of putting AI and intelligence into space. It's infinite because you have infinite energy compared to Earth, at least, that you can capture with solar panels. The economics I did in December and showed everyone, this is extremely hot. Solar flux is 5x higher than on Earth. So you get 5 times, 500% more energy per solar square meter than on Earth. Costs 24/7 light plus higher flux. And the radiators make cooling for free once you have it up there. So very, very attractive. That is the first piece of the equation. When are these AI satellites ready to scale? I think this is a minute innovation. It's a small innovation challenge, which I would give it 12 to 18 months before these things are hugely scalably available, assuming the chips are ready and everything else. But as a pure technology, not like some unknown time in the future, I think this is extremely doable within the next 12 months. Give it 6 months buffer, next 18 months. Which leads me to the second important inflection point variable here needed for scaled AI compute, which is Starship. To boil it down to the economic inflection point, we need to bring cost to orbit of a kilogram of mass below $200. That is my inflection point. Elon always talks about $10, but he's just overdoing it. I know Elon has to think about these things because he has to get to $10 in 2030s at some point. I don't care about that. The inflection point is $200 per kilogram. Falcon is between 2,000 and 2,500 right now. So the cheapest orbital lift price or cost we have is $2,000 roughly, 2,500 to 2,000. So the question is, when is Starship ready to commercially do this stuff and re-land and reuse itself to get that cost below $200 per kilogram? And when these two curves, these two trajectories of innovation meet, when Starship can deliver $200 per kilogram to orbit, and when the AI satellites are ready, all hell breaks loose. People are not aware of what that means. And guys, I tell you, this makes me so much more excited than like life on Mars or moon bases or Kardashev scale stuff, because this is for me all blah, blah. It's in the future. Of course, it's smart of Elon to think about these things and prepare it, otherwise it wouldn't happen. But the really exciting things for us as pioneer alpha chasers, if people who want to actually see results in a reasonable amount of time, is to determine when these tactical inflection points actually happen. And the difference between them happening in 6 months versus 12 months versus 18 months versus 24 versus 36 months is the difference between infinite riches and going broke. It's very dramatic if you're in the market. So that is what we are always focused on. We are focused on strategic first principle innovation, of course. Of course, we need to understand Kardashev scale things. Of course, we have to understand Dyson swarms. Of course, we have to understand terafabs. But it's easy to understand. That's not hard. The hard part is to put it on a timeline and say, is this stuff hot in December this year or December next year or December 2028? That's where the money is. And when I look at this stuff, I think the market is not aware of what's really happening. The market is not aware that this insane future that Elon is talking about will be triggered and kicked off very soon at scale with massive cash flows. And it's the only business model, by the way, different from FSD and Robotaxi, different from Optimus even. This is the only business model that truly scales straight into infinity. Get this, Wall Street analysts. Now it blows their mind. Now they think we're all crazy. But it scales straight into infinity because it's a business model that just captures energy, turns it into intelligence, and that's it. And super clean, it's super lean, it does nothing else, and there's infinite value here. So it's quite exciting to say the least. But as I said, what's even more exciting is now we get a first glimpse into the actual tactical planning of SpaceX. And I told everyone, this is actually much easier than FSD and Robotaxi. It's also much easier than Optimus. It's even easier than EVs, if you ask me. Not because it's objectively easy, not because I could just do it, but because the only truly difficult and hard part of this whole thing is Starship. But Starship is also the most advanced. Starship is more or less a done deal. I think the remaining innovation required for Starship is actually vastly more complex than the satellite. But we are also 90%, 95% through with Starship. So I think the gating function here is not the satellite. The satellite will be much easier than anyone thinks right now. And Starship is kind of the little bit the tricky part. When are we ready with Starship? But the schedule is very clear. April is the next or first V3 launch. I don't know if V3 is the breakthrough or V4, but I think it will happen before the end of 2027. We will get Starship ready. And if that's true, it's such a big deal, I can't even put it into words. And now that thing, the blueprint of the AI satellites combined with Starship orbital lift capability, that is the platform and the scaling function on that we then can put Terrafab. Terrafab only makes sense once these things work, because only then do you have infinite demand for chips. And only then can Terrafab truly put the supplies out. So if we aim Terrafab being ready in 4 years or something, it all works out pretty nicely. This stuff is ready in 2 years, latest. It then can scale for 2 years with NVDA and some other basic stuff, maybe AI5, AI6, before we actually need Terrafab. I mean, once this starts scaling, it doesn't mean it scales like from 0 to Kardashev 2 in a month. It's still going to have lots of little kinks and problems, but that doesn't matter. So that's my take. That's why I found this so exciting, and I hope you find it exciting too.